"They call him the Beast of Netherwood," the housekeeper said low as the carriage rattled through the black iron gates. "You'll not have been told the whole of it, being sent here as a punishment, so I'll tell you plain, girl, before you set eyes on him, don't scream. He can bear anything but the screaming." Clara Ashworth kept her hands folded in her lap and did not answer. She had done enough answering in the last month to last a lifetime, to the magistrate, to her uncle, to the cold-eyed lady of the house where she had been a governess until she was accused, wrongly and with witnesses paid, of a theft she had not committed. Rather than see her hanged, her uncle had called in an old debt and had her sent here instead, to the one house in England that could never keep a servant, to serve the scarred and half-mad Duke of Netherwood, who had come back from the wars a monster and shut himself away where no one would look at him. She had expected to be afraid. She found, stepping down into the great cold courtyard, that she was mostly tired. The house rose above her, vast and shuttered, half its windows dark. It had the look of a place that had stopped waiting for anything. A single lamp burned in a high window, and Clara looked up at it and thought, "He is up there, then. The man, they say, is a beast." She was given a small room and a list of rules. The Duke was not to be looked upon directly. The Duke took his meals alone. The Duke walked the long gallery at night when he believed the house asleep, and no one was to disturb him or cross his path. The Duke's rooms were cleaned only in his absence. Above all, the Duke was not to be pitied. He had turned 2 footmen out of doors for the crime of looking sorry for him. "And what am I to do?" Clara asked. "You're to keep the east wing," the housekeeper said. "Dust it, air it, mend what wants mending. He never goes there. It was hers, the old Duchess, his mother, gone these 3 years. He can't abide the sight of it, and he can't abide it left to rot, so it wants a body to keep it that neither he need see nor she'd have been ashamed of. You'll do well enough if you keep out of his way." For a fortnight Clara kept out of his way. She dusted the shrouded furniture of the east wing and drew back the curtains to let the light into rooms that had not seen it in years, and she came to know the dead Duchess a little through her things, the half-finished embroidery still in its hoop, the books with pressed flowers marking the pages, the portrait of a boy with grave, dark eyes who could only have been the Duke, before the wars, before whatever it was that had made him a beast. She grew fond of the boy in the portrait. She could not help it. She saw the Duke himself only once in that fortnight, and by accident. She had risen before dawn, unable to sleep, and gone down to the kitchens for a candle, and coming back through the great hall she had seen him at the far end, a tall dark shape by the cold hearth, half turned away. She had stopped. She had not screamed. She had simply stood, and after a moment she had said, quite calmly, "Good morning, your Grace," and dropped a curtsy, and gone on her way up the stairs, and she had felt his eyes on her back the whole length of the hall and had not once looked round. She did not know, could not have known, that Gabriel Thornton, 9th Duke of Netherwood, had stood frozen at the hearth long after she was gone, one hand pressed unconsciously to the ruined left side of his face, and had thought. She did not flinch. The days after that first encounter in the hall were, for Gabriel, a study in reluctance. He would tell himself he had imagined it, the steadiness of her, the plain good morning, the way she had not looked round though she must have felt his stare. Surely she had been merely too frightened to run. Surely by the second week she would be gone, like all the others, and he could return to the clean, cold certainty of his solitude. She did not go. He heard of her from the housekeeper, who reported the doings of the east wing with a wonder she tried to hide. The Duchess's rooms aired and warmed. The moth kept from the winter furs. The little clock on the mantel, stopped these 3 years, wound and set and ticking again, and hadn't the Duke himself gone very still when he heard it, passing in the gallery? He had. He had stood outside the door and listened to that small, familiar sound, his mother's clock, and something had moved in his chest that he had thought long since scarred over. He began to invent reasons to pass the east wing. He was not proud of this. A man of his years and rank, skulking in his own gallery to catch sight of a housemaid through a doorway, he despised the picture of it and did it anyway. He saw her sweeping. He saw her at the high windows, throwing them wide to the March air, her sleeves pushed up and a smudge of dust on her cheek, singing something low and tuneless to herself. He saw her stop before his boyhood portrait and study it a long while, and reach up once to straighten it where it hung crooked, and he had to turn away from the doorway at that, his heart doing something painful and unfamiliar. He knew her name by then. Clara. He had asked the housekeeper as though it were of no consequence, and the housekeeper had told him, and had not quite managed to keep the hope out of her old face, and Gabriel had scowled and dismissed her, and then stood at his window a long time, saying the name over silently, as if testing whether it would break him. It did not break him, that was the strangest part. For 3 years everything soft had felt like a wound waiting to be reopened, and he had walled off softness accordingly. But the thought of the girl in his mother's rooms, singing tunelessly with dust on her cheek, was not a wound. It was a small warm coal in a cold grate, and he found himself, against every resolution, feeding it. Still he kept his distance. He would not be a monster in deed as well as face. She was in his power, sent here helpless and disgraced, and he had seen in the wars what powerful men did with helpless people, and he had sworn he would sooner die than be numbered among them. So he watched from doorways and said nothing, and told himself it was enough merely that the house was less silent, that a clock ticked again in the east wing, that somewhere under his roof a young woman was not afraid of him. It might have gone on so for years, his careful, starving distance, had he not found her that midnight in his mother's chair, working 3 flowers into a coverlet a dead woman had left undone, unafraid to look him full in the face and tell him he was not a beast. Gabriel Thornton had not been looked at squarely by any person outside his own household in 3 years, and inside it only by those paid too well to leave. The wound had taken him at the siege, a burst shell, a wall of fire, a comrade dragged clear, and a captain who was not. The surgeons had saved his life and left him a face that made grown men glance away and children weep, a scar that dragged from brow to jaw down the left side and pulled the corner of his mouth into a permanent grim line. He had come home to a mother already dying, and had buried her, and had shut the gates, and had resolved to see out the rest of his days where no one need ever again school their features against the sight of him. He had grown used to the flinch. He had come in a bitter way to depend on it. It confirmed what he already believed, and there is a savage comfort in being proven right about the worst of things. The 2 footmen he had turned out had not flinched, they had done worse. They had pitied, and pity he could not abide, for pity said this thing is broken, and Gabriel had decided long ago that he was not broken but simply finished, which is a different and more bearable thing. The new girl did neither. That was what he could not account for. He took to watching for her, though he told himself he did not. He would time his silent night walks along the gallery to bring him past the east wing door, and through it he would see the changes she had wrought, the light let in, the shrouds drawn back, his mother's rooms brought gently back to life without a single ornament moved that his mother would have grieved to see moved. It was done with a care that unsettled him. A hired girl, sent here in disgrace, dusting a dead woman's embroidery as though it mattered. One night he found her there past midnight, seated in his mother's chair with the half-finished embroidery in her lap, working a needle through it by candlelight. He stopped in the dark of the doorway. He should have spoken sharply. He should have reminded her of the rules. Instead he stood and watched her small deft hands, and after a moment she said, without looking up, "I hope you don't mind, Your Grace." It seemed a shame to leave it undone. She was so nearly finished. 3 flowers more and it's a coverlet. "You knew I was there," he said. His voice, unused, came out rough. "I heard you." She lifted her eyes to him then, directly across the candle at the whole ruin of his face, and she did not look away, and she did not soften into pity, and she did not harden into disgust. She simply looked at him as one looks at a person. "You walk the gallery every night at this hour. I've grown used to the sound. You are not afraid of me." "No," she said, considering it honestly. "Should I be? You have not given me cause. You turn out footmen who pity you, and you frighten housemaids who scream, but you have never once, that I have heard, raised a hand to a living soul under this roof. A man is his deeds, Your Grace, not his face. I nursed a boy once whose face was burned worse than yours, and he was the sweetest creature God ever made. And I have known men with the faces of angels who were black to the bone. I stopped reading faces a long time ago. It's a poor way to know a person. Gabriel stood in the doorway of his mother's rooms and found he had nothing to say. No one had spoken to him so in 3 years. No one had spoken to him so, perhaps, ever. You may sit if you like, she added, returning to the needle. It's your house. I only meant to finish the flowers. He did not sit, but he did not leave either for a long while. And when at last he went, he took the boy's portrait he had never been able to look at down off the east wing wall and carried it back to his own rooms, and set it where he could see it, and did not fully understand why. Spring came to Netherwood, and with it 100 small changes that Gabriel would not have believed possible a season before. He opened the shutters. First one room, then another, not the whole house at once. He was not so far reborn as that, but enough that the servants began to move through rooms that had stood dark for years, and the great hall caught the afternoon sun and blazed with it, and dust danced gold in the long beams. He did it, he told himself, because a shut house went to ruin. He did it, in truth, because Clara had said one evening, mildly, over the supper she now shared with him at the small table, that it was a pity so fine a house should sit blind with all its eyes closed, and he had found he could not bear that she thought it a pity. They talked those spring evenings of everything. He had not known he had so much to say. He had thought the war had burned the words out of him along with everything else. But she asked questions no one else had dared, what the country had been like, out there before it became a place of fire, whether he had loved his soldiering before it ruined him, what his mother had been when she lived. And he answered, haltingly at first and then more freely, and found that speaking of the dead did not kill him after all, but eased something, the way lancing a wound eases it, painfully, toward healing. "You've not walked the gallery in a fortnight," she observed one evening. "I used to hear you every night. Now the house is quiet after dark." "I sleep," he admitted. It surprised him even as he said it. "I had not slept properly since I came home. Now I do." She smiled at that, a small private smile into the firelight, and did not say what she plainly thought, which was that she knew why. He knew it too. He was no longer alone in the dark with the captain's face and the wall of fire. He had, instead, the memory of a small deft hand working 3 flowers into a coverlet, and the sound of a clock his mother had wound, and a voice that told him he was not a beast, and these things stood between him and the old terrors like a lamp against the night. He grew bolder. He showed her the library, and watched her go very still with joy at the sight of it, and told her she might read anything in it she pleased, and took a fierce, quiet pleasure in the way she touched the spines as though they were living things. He walked with her once in the overgrown gardens his mother had loved and he had let run wild, and they spoke of restoring them, and he heard himself making plans for the future, for the living years ahead, when for 3 years he had made plans only for how to endure. He caught himself and fell silent, frightened by his own hope, and Clara had looked at him and said gently, "It's allowed, you know, to want things again," and he had had to look away out over the wild garden so she would not see his face. He was in love with her. He had stopped pretending otherwise even to himself, and with the love came the fear and the honor and the cold knowledge of all the reasons he had no right to it, a knowledge that would soon be put to the hardest test the world outside his gates could devise. There was a test before the end, and it came from the world outside the gates. Word had reached the county that the beast of Netherwood had opened his shutters, and word of that kind travels fast among people with little else to occupy them. So it was that one bright afternoon a carriage came up the drive uninvited, bearing Lady Marchbanks and her 2 grown daughters, neighbors who had not called in 3 years and who had come now plainly, not out of kindness but out of curiosity, to see the monster in his den, and to carry the tale back to the drawing-rooms of the county. Gabriel would have had them turned away. He stood at the window watching the carriage and felt the old iron close over him, the old instinct to hide. But Clara laid a hand on his arm. "Let them come in," she said quietly. If you hide, you tell them the tale they came to hear. Sit in your own hall in your own light and let them find nothing to whisper about. I will be beside you." So he received them. He came down into the sunlit hall and stood with his ruined face turned full to the windows, hiding nothing, and Lady Marchbanks, for all her breeding, could not keep the flinch from her features, and one of the daughters made a small sound and looked at her shoes. Gabriel felt the old shame rise like bile. And then Clara was beside him, her hand slipping into the crook of his arm as naturally as breathing, her chin up, her whole bearing that of a woman entirely at home and entirely unashamed of the man she stood beside. "Lady Marchbanks," she said warmly, "how good of you to call at last. His Grace and I so seldom have company. You'll take tea. The gardens are just coming into their glory. You must see the roses before you go." It was masterfully done. She gave them no monster to gawk at, only a gracious household and a duke who, whatever the state of his face, was plainly and comfortably beloved. The daughters, who had come to be frightened, found themselves instead being shown the library and the restored gardens by a young woman so evidently happy that their curiosity curdled into something closer to envy. And Lady Marchbanks, watching the Duke bend his scarred head to hear something his companion murmured, and watching him almost smile at it, understood that she had come for a tale of horror and would go home with a tale of a love match instead, which was, in the drawing-rooms of the county, a far greater sensation. When the carriage had gone, Gabriel stood a long moment in the emptied hall. "You did that for me," he said. "I did it with you," Clara corrected. "You stood in your own light and let them look. That was the hardest thing, and you did it. I only poured the tea." She studied him. "You did not hide, Gabriel. Do you know what that cost you a year ago? You could not cross the hall by daylight. And today you stood in the full sun before the greatest gossip in 3 counties and did not once put your hand to your face." He had not, he realized. He had not touched the scar the whole while. He looked down at the woman beside him, this disgraced, dauntless, tea-pouring girl who had walked into his shut house as a punishment and made it, without his ever quite noticing when, into a home. And he thought that the surgeons who had saved his life had done only half the work, and that the other half, the deeper half, had been done here, in the light of his own hall, by a hand that would not let him hide. That evening he sat long by the fire after she had gone up, turning the day over in his mind. She had stood beside him before the world and claimed him without a flicker of shame. And it came to him, with the force of a thing long known and never before admitted, that he could not keep her here on the strength of her disgrace, could not let a woman of such courage go on believing herself a fallen thing, sheltered only because no other door was open to her. If she was to stay, it must be as a free woman who chose him, not a ruined one who had no choice. Whatever it cost him, she must first be free. It was the thought that would send him in the days to come to his desk and the long work of the letters, though he did not yet let himself look past that work, to the gray evening when a cleared and unbound woman might walk out of his life, or into it forever. After that the house changed by degrees, the way a hard winter breaks, not all at once, but a little more light each day. He began to take his supper in the small dining room instead of alone in his study, and Clara, who oversaw the meal, would linger to see the fire made up, and they would fall to talking. He learned that she had been a governess and wrongly accused, and sent here to save her neck, and something in him that had been dead for 3 years woke up angry on her behalf. He learned that she read voraciously and had opinions on everything, and was not the least afraid to disagree with a duke. She learned, though he told it haltingly, over many evenings of the siege, and the wall of fire, and the captain he could not save, whose face he still saw every night when he closed his eyes. "You blame yourself for living," she said one evening quietly when he had at last told her the whole of it. "That is the true wound, your Grace. The face is nothing. The face healed years ago. It's the other thing that's still open." He looked at her across the candle for a long moment. "How is it," he said, "that you see so much?" "I had a great deal of practice at being overlooked," she said. "One sees a good deal from the corner of a room." He found he did not want her in the corner of any room. He found he wanted her opposite him always at the small table with the fire made up, telling him he was wrong about something. The old bitter comfort of the flinch was gone. He had traded it for something far more dangerous, which was hope. He began to walk the gallery less at night because he slept now. He began once to laugh, a strange creaking sound that startled them both, and Clara had laughed too in delight, and said it wanted oiling but it would do. He knew what was happening to him. He was too honest to pretend otherwise. He was falling, gracelessly and completely, for the disgraced governess who kept his mother's rooms, and he knew, too, all the reasons it was impossible. She was in his employ and his power. He would sooner have died than press an advantage there. She was young and whole and could have any life she chose once her name was cleared, and he was a ruined man twice her weight in years of grief, with a face that emptied ballrooms. He resolved to say nothing. He resolved to clear her name, that at least he could do, and quietly did, writing letters to men who owed the house of Netherwood favors, until the paid witnesses recanted and the true thief was found, and the charge against her was struck from the record entire. He meant to send her away then, cleared and free, with money enough to make her own choice. It was the honourable thing. He had the letter of reference half written when she came to him one evening, having heard the news, and stood in the study door. "You cleared my name," she said. "The magistrate wrote to me himself. I am free to go where I please." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "You mean to send me away?" "I mean to give you your life back," Gabriel said. He did not rise from the desk. He did not trust himself to. "You were sent here as a punishment, Clara. You need not endure it a day longer. There is money settled on you and a reference no house in England would question. You may go tomorrow." "And if I do not wish to go?" The pen stilled in his hand. "You cannot wish to stay here," with he gestured once at his own face, the old bitter word rising, "with the beast of Netherwood." She crossed the room then and came around the desk, and did a thing no living soul had done in 3 years. She reached up and laid her hand, very gently, against the ruined side of his face, over the scar, and held it there, warm, unflinching, while he went utterly still beneath her touch. "I have never once in this house," she said, "met a beast. I have met a lonely, honourable, quick-tempered man who takes better care of a dead woman's embroidery than of his own heart, and who cleared the name of a girl who could do nothing for him because it was right. I do not wish to go, Gabriel. I have not wished to go for a very long while, and I will not be sent like a parcel to make you feel you have done the honourable thing. Ask me to stay. Ask me plainly and mean it, and let me answer for myself." Her hand was still warm against the ruined side of his face. Gabriel did not move. He hardly dared to breathe, lest the whole impossible moment shatter like glass. "Ask me to stay," she had said. "Ask me plainly and mean it." He turned his face very slightly into her palm, the only surrender he knew how to make, and when he spoke his voice was not steady at all. "I have no right to ask it," he said. "You are young and whole and free now, and I am this. A ruined man in a shut house, twice your years in grief, with a face that empties rooms. Any life you like is open to you. It would be the act of the beast they call me to ask you to spend it here in the dark with me." "Then it is fortunate," Clara said, "that I am not asking your leave to be reasonable. I am asking you to be honest. Do you love me, Gabriel? Not do you deserve me, not is it wise, not is it fair, do you love me? Because I love you, and I am done being sensible about it, and I should very much like to know if I stand here alone." "You do not stand alone." The words broke out of him at last, 3 years of silence behind them. "God help me, Clara, you have not stood alone since the night you finished the flowers. I love you. I have loved you since I do not know when, since the morning in the hall when you did not flinch, perhaps, or since you called me a lonely man instead of a monster. I love you, and I have been trying to give you away because I could not believe I was permitted to keep anything so good. There, it is said. Now you know the worst of me, that a scarred old soldier who frightens children is fool enough to love you." She was smiling, and her eyes were wet, and she took his face in both her hands now and bent and kissed him. The scarred side first, deliberately, and then his mouth, and Gabriel, who had thought himself finished, who had thought all the tender years burned out of him, found that he was not finished at all, but only, like the shut house, waiting for someone brave enough to open the windows and let in the light. They were married in the small chapel on the grounds as summer came full, with the gardens half restored and blazing, and the shutters of Netherwood thrown wide to the last window. He wore no mask and made no apology for his face, and Clara stood beside him in a gown the color of the wild roses they had planned together, and looked at him the whole while as though he were the only man in the world worth looking at, which, to her, he was. The county, which had whispered for years of the beast of Netherwood, whispered now of something stranger, that the Duke had been seen to laugh, that the shut gates stood open, that a young duchess had done what the surgeons could not and healed the man behind the wound. For that was the truth of it in the end. The scar remained, scars do, but the other wound, the open one, the guilt and the grief and the great cold loneliness of a man who believed himself finished, that healed, slowly and completely, under the daily patient warmth of a woman who had stopped reading faces long ago and read hearts instead. In the years that followed, Netherwood became known for its light. The gardens were the finest in the county, and the gates stood always open, and the great hall blazed with sun by day and candlelight by night, and there was often the sound of laughter in it, and later, small quick footsteps on the stairs and a small hand tucked trustingly into a large scarred one. Gabriel Thornton lived to be an old man, and was beloved, and no one who knew him in those later years could ever quite believe the tales of the beast of Netherwood, for the Duke they knew was the gentlest man in England. Made so, he would tell anyone who asked, by a disgraced governess who came to his shut house as a punishment and stayed as its greatest blessing, and who had looked at the worst of him once by candlelight and had not looked away.